Welcome to Darker Days Radio presents another deep dive series, this time focusing on the old gods of Appalachia. It's Appalachia, not Appalachia. It depends.
Appalachia.
Yeah,
Appalachia.
let's get this right. Anyway, yeah, we're looking at that game. So over the next 3 episodes, we'll be looking at, starting off with a setting review. We'll be looking then on the next episode, we'll be looking at character creation. And then after that, we'll be looking at doing a short let's play. So we'll play through that. And then obviously, so this is similar to our previous mini-series, our deep dive, which we did on Imperium Maledictum. And we've got on the books, we want to do cults in future. We want to do some of the other smaller games, which will be really quick to go through. Things like Cyborg or
any of the Borgs.
Any of the Borgs we can do, and other things like that take our interest. And of course, if you've got a game that you are interested in, maybe us exploring what fits our kind of horror wheelhouse, then please suggest it to us. You can get in contact with us. All that information will be at the end. So before we get into this, let's have a quick gaming news wrap up. Right, what's cool coming up? Eldritch Automata, which I did some writing for, is coming back for funding. It's this time going to be on BackerKit. I don't know quite when. It's soon. They've done a new quick start and so forth. So in other words, the time that's between the last campaign and this campaign means more work has been put into getting it even closer to a finished product. So there you go. Cubicle 7 is currently running a Kickstarter, which is already funded for the Laundry RPG second edition, which is based upon the Laundry Files series of books, which is I've not read them, but Chick and James have, and we're going to do. We've got in the works an episode which will be a interview with the team at Cubicle 7 behind that.
I would describe the Laundry Files as low budget Delta Green.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that makes sense. With office humor type, nonsense.
Right, exactly.
Like a bit of tongue in cheek, some Cthulhu elements in there, and then office red tape nonsense, which we're all used to working in the corporate world. And then the other thing is that very soon, I know it's soon, is the Strange Light workshop for Iron Kingdoms RPG. So that's a D&D 5e system, but they're layering on some things that make it move to being more an investigative horror game rather than a traditional D&D game. So more art of that has been previewed, so hopefully we'll see that soon. Anything else I've missed? I know there's other books that are out. Oh, I can say definitely. Valve Absolution for Wrath and Glory is so close to being released because I've seen things, but it's so close.
They keep teasing it.
I know there's so many things in the works, but it's very close to coming out. So that's going to be it's basically the Space Marine player's book for Wrath and Glory.
Yeah. And Chris, The Hedge came out finally.
Oh, fuck, yeah.
Yes. It's been so long that
The Hedge came out finally. So that's a book for Changeling Lost second edition. It is also the last book, planned ever for now for Chronicles of Darkness.
Yep.
The Hedge basically is how to exist, navigate, and so forth within the Hedge in Changeling Lost, which is this other reality layered onto ours that's between our world and the dream world. There is tons of stuff in there like hedge denizens, magic, and fabricating things within the hedge, about how this psychoreactive reality works. Various hedge markets that border between our world and the hedge located throughout the world, which I wrote some of, and how you can make your own hedge market. That's fun. And then a whole segment about using the hedge for dream travel for changelings and going into the dreams of other entities within Chronicles of Darkness. So what is getting into the dreams of a vampire like? Not very fun. What's it like going into a mage? Definitely not fun. And what's it like going into the dreams of a beast? Really, really, really bad. Yeah.
I got a couple of
I really
announcements
like that because
too. Oh,
there's
sorry.
not much. Oh, I'm sorry, Crystal. I was cutting you off. Please go ahead.
No, no, Mike, you do yours thing first because it has to do with the hedge. I have other game announcements too.
Oh, okay. Uh, I think the hedge is really cool and exciting because there isn't much coming out for Chronicles of Darkness these days. But the fact that this covers a
There's
bunch of the
no
other
more.
monster, yeah, indeed. Uh,
Yeah.
the fact that it covers a bunch of other monster types in that setting it's really nice to see that everyone's kind of getting some extra stuff. I definitely want to pick this up and check out what's going on for the Promethean dreams.
I can't remember what I wrote for that. Honestly, it's been that long. I can say that for Vampire, it was really interesting because it essentially allowed. It always comes back to the thing where certain splats really work well as allies, and you can definitely see how a vampire in torpor can use its dreams and have changelings go in and out and go, hey, here's the latest news updates while you've been asleep. Oh, and please don't let your beast self kill me in your dream. That kind of thing. But otherwise, good fun.
It's nice to see a book that actually connects them all well together, rather than just they exist in this universe but are not fully dealt with.
And I'm certain while I try my best, I know it's like getting the metaphysics of Chronicles of Darkness is difficult because there's the dreams, there's the dream realms that mages can get into, which are slightly that changelings can't get into, and then that's that freaking deep dream realm that beasts, the beastie things exist in. And it's just like, it's so complicated. So we didn't get. It's obviously it's angled more at changelings are going to get into someone else's dreams. How can you make this fun? Yeah. Crystal.
All right, a couple of things. First, start following Cephalofair Games if you're interested in Gloomhaven. The RPG is now moving along. All of our first drafts or final drafts are in, and they're going into the development phase now. So all of the stuff that I have written is going off and will be adjusted for everything. So if you're interested in that, please go and follow Cephalofair Games and follow Monica Paprocki, who is the marketing individual for Cephalofair Games, as well as, I want to make sure I pronounce her name correctly, Danielle Lauzon Harper, who is the developer. So that's for that one. And then the Black Ballad, which is what happens to your party after a total party kill. And now you are in the Deadlands. That is now being fulfilled to Kickstarter or BackerKit backers, and so will soon be up for sale. The PDF has been out for quite some time, so please check that out. That's a project that I wrote on as well.
You need to run that for us.
I think that's one of the deep dives we're going to do.
I just remembered another thing that got. I don't know if we covered it because I knew it was coming up, but I'm trying to think when we last released an episode and recorded. So, because this was like March 8th, so this is mostly that month. The last month we didn't release anything. So, Inheritance of Embers for the Eldari for Wrath and Glory is also out, which I wrote on.
Nice.
So, yeah, we can play as Drakari. Huzzah! Right, I think that's all the interesting game releases. I think also there's a new vampire stuff out, isn't there? Is there something new for vampire?
Oh, the relationship
Crimson
thing?
Gutter? No, Crimson Gutter, which is a Chronicles book. So we might look at that at some point ourselves, see if it's useful, because I think, is that mostly the most recent scenario type book they've put out?
I want to say yes. I know that there are some city books that are in the future. Not sure which cities they are, but I know that they're being done. But yeah, I think this one is a punk hack version for setting. making it
Cool. Okay.
grittier.
Right. That's all the gaming news I can think of. That's possibly relevant to anything we might run any time soon, or episodes coming up, or stuff that we've worked on. So let's get into the main topic, which is which David, you have control.
You mean I was the only one mentally enough to read that 440-page book?
Yeah,
I read a bunch of it, but
I read some.
there's a lot. There's a lot in here.
It's
It's gonna be a lengthy
book.
episode.
Yes, I apologize. I got carried away as well when I wrote the notes. So, cool. Yeah, so we're going to be looking at the Old Gods of Appalachia RPG that was released last year from Monty Cook. But the Old Gods game, it comes from the podcast, which started in 2019 and is produced by Deep Nerd Media. It's a horror anthology story set in rural Appalachia in the eastern US after the First World War. Though the podcast does jump around times, most of the setting material in the book is set for like the 1920s, like late 1910s, early 1920s. But you can also time jump within it. It's written for the southern Appalachians. This is why we're saying Appalachia rather than the other version that I can't remember. Mike, how do they say it up near you?
Yeah, Appalachia.
Appalachia, that's it. Yeah,
Yeah, as opposed to Appalachia.
yeah. So there's a big southern vibe to it, and the guy who reads the stories reads it in such a way that it is written with that accent in mind, and uses the languages of that. And it gives you a really good sense of immersion into it, so you feel like you're actually there. It's a punky kind of tale of the little guy, usually miners or tradesmen, a fair few witchy women against some kind of big evil thing, which could either be a corporation or a monster. And we'll delve into what they are later. The game has variation to the podcast. Direct crossovers are difficult. Another example that has just been released is the Lost Mountain Saga for Vessen, which was a podcast that was turned into a Vessen game. On that one. Great story, great podcast. The game, the scenario could do with some less time jumps. But anyway, what is good with this book? Before we do a dive into what Appalachia is and everything like that, is it's actually quite well written, and it does have a lot of connection notes to the podcast, quotes and stories, and ways you can adapt the setting. So this is a Monty Cook game. Monty Cook are very good at giving you hints, help, sidebars, and all that kind of stuff to kind of expand upon and see how you can link it to other stuff. So it's got your usual Monty Cook vibe to it. So do go have that. Unfortunately, Chig's not here, so we can't have a counter argument at that point, I feel. But so that's kind of at the base that is. So we've already had the discussion of Appalachia or Appalachia, as we are in the southern setting. It's based in the states of, the northernmost one is Pennsylvania, but it tends to be kind of southern Pennsylvania. Then you've got North Carolina, Tennessee, Virginia, West Virginia, and Kentucky. But let's have a little bit of a look. What are the Appalachians? We all know kind of like the New England Cthulhu Lovecraftian horror idea, and it kind of stems from what the Appalachians are. They are actually one of the oldest mountain ranges on Earth, and some of the crystalline structures that you can find within the mountains are up to 1.1 billion years old. And these are older than the rings of Saturn, so these are very, very old mountains. Before continental drift happened, they were also this part of the same mountain range as Scottish Highlands, kind of most of the UK really, from South Wales up, the Norwegian Caledonian Mountains, the Little Atlas Mountains of Morocco, among others, and which were known as the Central Pangaea Mountains. So they're old and they're connected to old lands. Obviously, over time, continental drift happened, things separated. The reason they don't look like a lot of the other mountains is because of weather. So they are low mountains, they've eroded over geological timescales. So what we see is the roots of ancient mountains from millions and millions of years ago. They are the exposed lands from hundreds of millions of years ago. And what now may lie below that surface may soon be discovered. So, yeah, we've got a bit boring history there. And then it's like, oh, hang on a minute. These are old. And these are the roots of old.
It's pretty crazy when you go and look at some of like the information boards you have at some of the mountains around here in New England. Those show you that these mountains that you're climbing, which feel pretty tall, have eroded 80%.
Yeah.
That's how much material has been lost. You're just looking at the bottom 20%, basically. So they usually have, weathered tops with nothing growing on them. It's kind of just a bald peak, for example. And yeah, you really are just seeing this ancient thing that's been slowly weathered away.
Yeah. And I like the kind of image because because when we come into kind of the story in a bit, you've got all this weathering and stuff, and you are eroding it, and that veil is thinning. So I think that's kind of a really nice tie-in to what it is. For this episode, we're going to look at the history and of the setting of the region, only a little bit of kind of connection to that. We're going to focus mostly on the horror. There are sections in the book that detail the landscape, the weather, the flora and fauna, but not in the way that we would want them to, I suppose, and we'll come to maybe that later. So, history of settlement, history of Appalachia. But first of all, as this is southern states and the game is set at the turn of the century, people's ideas were very different today. Now, the podcast handles this very, very well, and it does look at racism, and it does look at patriarchal ideas and abuse, and it does deal with it in a good way. And this also being Monty Cook, they deal with it in a very good way. And at the back of the book, there is a big checklist to say what you feel like you're okay with, what you don't feel like you're okay with. And it clearly makes out that anybody who is a racist or an abuser is the bad guy. And that is one thing that we always like to state as well. Like, none of that's good. None of that's good. Don't actively portray as good people, please. They are the bad guys. Monty Cook are pretty good at that. But yeah, so that's there. We all here at DDR do not support racist, homophobic, or transphobic, misogynistic, and extreme political ideas. So if you don't know that and you've been listening to us for a long time, then clean your ears out. So yeah. That's just a kind of the caveat on this. It's in a time where bad things were bad. So yeah,
I'm sure the old gods and entities being dug up from the mountains really don't give a shit about people's bigotry and what's important to them. Everyone's equal opportunity to be murdered. So more so those people than anyone else.
Yeah. In season 2, there is quite a grisly murder of an arsehole.
Brilliant.
Oh, that was a really great story.
The lady,
Yep.
who we're actually going to talk about later, but yeah, he gets murdered in quite a horrible way.
And just thinking on that point, I guess because of, and I'm sure you're going to get into this with when you get into the history section, because of where it's set, and the fact that the whole concept is, you know, ancient things, old things coming back and influencing the present. That surely is a point of being able to contrast how what within the game terms are the current bigotries and issues versus, you know, are concepts which are in some respects quite alien then to the cultures and peoples and societies that existed well before Western civilization, you know, European colonizers.
Yeah, it is. I think one of the key things that runs through the game and the podcast is this idea of change and things moving forward and things being different, and you've got to somehow take your old ideas and morph them into how the new world is growing. So there is a very, very big idea of change, and obviously the ideas of bigotry and things are changing at that time, and we have very, very different views now. So yeah, it's for me, I think it's kind of one of the key things is change within this. So, and yeah, we'll delve more into that as we go along. And talking about, so we're going to do a very, very quick history lesson of the settlement, because you are dealing with 1910 to 1920s. It is mostly white settlement. But how did these people get here? So this is actually quite key because it kind of tells you where the culture comes from and where the beliefs and ideas come from. So understanding kind of the roots and the settlement will help you understand a little bit of kind of why English people are assholes. So at the start of the 18th century, it was a home of mixed nations from the Shawnee and Cherokee. I'm going to pronounce this one wrong, to the Iroquois.
Iroquois. Yeah,
Iroquois.
you were correct.
And,
you're close, yeah.
Yeah.
yeah. And Powhatan. But then the white folk came, because that's what we like to do in the late 1700s. And it was mostly Scotch, Irish, English, German, French, and Spanish who were fleeing religious persecution from home because they were extremely pious, kind of extreme religious ideas. And as the book says, they pushed, clawed, claimed, and massacred their way from the Atlantic coastline to the Appalachian Mountains, crawling deeper and deeper into the hills. They were homesteading people. They homesteaded in the mountains where the temperate climate, deep pine forest, hollers, and hills reminded of the land that they had left behind. Small communities arose, and yes, there were blacks and Native Americans, and they did find a place within these communities, and they even became prominent members in some communities, despite that deep-rooted racism. Communities grew up and were tight-knit, but also culturally diverse, built up of independent family groups. So we've got multiple different European groups coming in there, and we've also got blacks and Native Americans who are part of these. So it's very, very culturally diverse. But as whenever you move somewhere, you look for places where you've got local resources, streams, rivers, natural junctions in valleys, and hollers. At this point, I would like to ask Chig what a holler is, but Chig is not here, so him being the southerner.
Did you find out? Because I looked this up.
Yeah. I know what one is. I know.
Actually,
what one is,
Chig probably wouldn't know what a holler is because they don't have them in Texas.
Yeah. So, does anybody want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, Mike, do you want to jump in?
Sure. As I understand it, a holler is just like a creek, or as Chig would pronounce it, a crick. Actually, I think crick might be the pronunciation commonly in at least in Virginia and West Virginia. Don't quote me on that, but I remember when I was down there, some people using crick. I'm pretty sure. But yeah, it's just a
Yeah.
you know
It's
not really
a-
like a big river, but like a
It's like
small,
a-
probably fast moving.
It's like a
brook or
valley
something like
that it's the valley that the crick or creek runs through.
Yeah.
As far as I'm
it's the
aware,
actual
like
valley,
because it's
yeah.
like the valley part.
Oh, because it's basically it's hollow. It's
Yeah.
hollow,
Yeah.
but pronounced as holler. Yeah, all right, that makes
Hollow.
sense.
Yeah, it's a really small valley carved out by a small stream or creek, from what I could gather. When I first read it, I'm like, is it a gorge? Is it something like a gorge? I'm like, no, gorges are quite deep, cliffy things, but this is just like a gentle valley with a small river down the middle of it. And so yeah, there's loads of them in there. It's a term that is used throughout the book and throughout the podcast series. Haints and hollers is quite a thing that is said quite regularly. But anyway, moving on. So it's a very family-centric way of life that they did. There's hard labor. Families would have their trade, and it'd be hard labor in the hills. You'd be mining, woodcutting, hunting, raising cattle, farming, and stuff like that. And because it's a homesteading kind of community, families would start with kind of a one-room hut, and then they'd build it up over time in generations. And from this, the individual homesteads up and down the hollers and the creeks and the valleys would then turn into towns and villages and larger settlements. In some cases, families would settle in the entire holler, so each member would build their own cabin somewhere along the brook or stream. They'd be separated by walking distance, but they'd each have their own separate house. And family was very important. You relied on them and they relied on you. Clothing was passed down through generations. Things were used until they broke and then repaired and then used until no longer usable. They were resourceful people, folk built on tradition and survival. It was a harsh climate. It was a harsh region. They became a hardy people. And as we've already said, this is a time of change. Prohibition has just come into force. Telephones are spreading, and railroads are now starting to connect communities, and large companies control towns with jobs. They own the homes, you get paid in script, and travel is becoming cheaper. So that's kind of a very, 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 very brief look at Appalachia, and then
Certainly. Yeah. I mean, jumping in, so I've actually been to a lot of these states in the Appalachia region, so I'm happy to talk about some specifics later, including some creepy things that happened to me. But kind of keeping with what you were saying, Dave, one of the things that I think really is important to this region is the geology. That's really what has affected, as you were saying with the hollers and other things, has affected how people live, how they survive, and kind of what industries popped up in this region. This book that we have breaks up the region to the different states. But I think one of the interesting things is that individual state cultures don't necessarily extend into the Appalachia region. In fact, the Appalachian region in, let's say, Pennsylvania probably has a lot more similarities culturally to Appalachia down in Tennessee than it does to, say, Philadelphia or Pittsburgh in that state. So I think that's a really interesting thing, just how all these different constructs that we have in the United States of the state don't exactly culturally map to the people in this region, which I think is kind of important to bring up.
Yeah, it's almost like its own state in itself.
But you can see that with you can just do a kind of a search for it. You can look for like maps that show travel times in the US. And like in the 1800s, it would have taken, because of the mountains, it would have taken you like let's say would have taken you like 5 weeks to get down towards like Mississippi area, right? Because of the presence of these mountains. And then by 1830 on the same map, that same distance takes 2 weeks, but to get deep into regions of the Appalachian Mountains takes still 2 weeks because you're trying to go into the mountains.
Yeah.
So that geography, as you say, why it almost feels like a state within state is because of that isolation. So the chain, I think I'm just looking at it, 1857, it still takes about 3 days to get into some of those areas, or 5 days. So, I mean, it's no longer weeks, it's days. But even by the time of when the game is set, rates of railroad travel into that region is still of the order of 1 or 2 days, or maybe more, depending on exactly how isolated it is.
There's actually, if anybody's really interested in this, there's actually a section in the book which talks about how you travel through the mountains because it's difficult. Talks about the bus services. It talks about the train travel, and there's even creepy stories in the podcast about how they built the tunnels and.
Oh yeah, that story is fantastic.
Yeah,
nice.
Don't go into the tunnels.
One of the coolest tie-ins that Monty Cook has is actually just a simple pamphlet you can buy, PDF, print out, and it's basically the train schedule for the region, which is a lot of fun.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Yes, it's carry on, Mike.
I guess just the last thing I wanted to bring up that I think this book does well is that it kind of shows Appalachia in the broader context rather than just saying that it's tied with West Virginia, which is a pretty common perception for people from other parts of the U.S. or other parts of the world. It really does extend out culturally in other places.
Yeah, when I was looking at this, it's like my image was that it was southern US, but it's actually not as southern as you think. It stops kind of halfway through Tennessee, but it actually goes all the way up into Canada. So it's kind of more mid to northern states rather than completely southern. I didn't realize how far north it actually ran.
Yeah, the mountain range, yes, goes from, I think, Georgia with the Smoky Mountains technically up to, as you said, Canada. But the Appalachia region, like the cultural region, is just the elements more, that are in this book. Yeah.
Oh, we should probably also state that even though I'm trying to keep the spoilers to an absolute minimum in this, this may contain spoilers for the podcast, but I'm trying to keep them to an absolute minimum. So,
as someone who has not listened to the podcast, it definitely spoiled stuff for me. So, listener beware. No, it's fine. It's the book. It's not you. It's the book.
The book is different to the podcast, but there because it was released halfway through season 3, I think. So it was written during season 2, released halfway through season 3. So there's no spoilers about season 4 in there, luckily. But there are spoilers to do with when we come to the magic, you'll probably pick up some spoilers. Everything else is, I'm trying to keep it to an absolute minimum. But just beware, if you want to listen to the podcast, you may hear some things. But yeah, so as Mike says, it does go into kind of the individual states and kind of things. And we're gonna talk about very few of these because there are some key regions that I mentioned throughout the podcast, and I'll drop just some names here and maybe a little bit of hints for those who know. As I say, this is why I just suddenly saw this and went, spoiler shit, yes. But yeah, so in Pennsylvania, you have, so each of these sections breaks down into kind of counties or towns, and within this, it has a list of what they call hushed murmurs, which are rumors or story hooks in there. And within this, you'll meet characters from the podcast who can ask you to do stuff, or you can interact with them. So the first state is Pennsylvania. You have Barrow, Avalon, and Forks Lake. Barrow is a very important city or town within the podcast. No major spoilers here, but it used to be called Pine Grove. It is now home and headquarters to the Barrow family. It's quite important in season 3. So it was kind of at the time that this was being released, and in the around 1860 or so. So before the book is set, E.P. Barrow, who was the head of the Barrow family, gave a sermon when the town was renamed after the family. And I'll leave it at that for those who know. And then we go into Kentucky, where you get Barlow and Witherville. Barlow again is quite common, especially in the season 1 and 2. It's quite a prominent town. North Carolina, you get Boone, Avery County, and Kenny. Again, you'll hear these names very, very regularly within the podcast. Then we pop over to Tennessee, where you get Baker's Gap. This is a valley and a town, and is home to the River Creek Baptist and the Ladies' Auxiliaries, and also a homeless encampment full of drifters and people who would ride the trains. And also home to the Good Mother Ministries and the Walker's House. And this is quite important in season 2. So, again, we'll just leave that. And then you get Tipton, Paschal Branch, Clifton, the Cumberland Plateau. Again, these all come with murmurs and rumors and things that you can use to drive your story through. Virginia, you get SL County, which is where Eddie Walker lives. You get Paradise, West Virginia. You've got Hilo Hill, Cranberry Bog, Tourniquet, which is home for the other Walker house, Sheila Walker. The Walker family are very important throughout the whole podcast. One thing that the book does, I do think quite well, is it doesn't rely on a meta plot. So there is no meta plot within Old Gods of Appalachia. The podcast, yes, there is, and there are stories within the book that relate to the podcast, but the game itself is not meta. You can fit yourself into all of the characters from there, and you can fit yourself into the stories if you want to. But you can also go off and tell your own stories. So there's no overarching thing that you need to know everything. And also, you can go to Bower County and you can go play with some snake handlers if you want to. They may or may not be good people.
Is it a good point to jump in here and say that because of it where it's located, right? Because I was like thinking other things which are good source of inspiration maybe for kind of setting and stuff. Is the Silent Hill series of games could likely be a good source of ideas because they're all set. Because Silent Hill itself is in-game verse is set in Maine, and then in the film they relocate it to West Virginia, and it's based there on Centralia, which is in Pennsylvania, which is where they burnt the roads. The coal mines basically are still ablaze since 1980, and that's what caused a ghost town. But it just feels like ripe for if you want other examples of that kind of
Silent Hill could easily be a modern version of Old Gods.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Really Absolutely. Just a modern setting.
One of the towns you mentioned, which I'll just go ahead and say is Barrow, definitely gave me Silent Hill vibes reading about it and kind of knowing what happens.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, very, very, very much so. Barrow is Silent Hill. But
cool.
Less fire, more creepy. But yeah, it's when you kind of read through it, and if you're aware of other games, stories, and things, there's a lot of inspiration taken from all over the place. You can quite clearly see where they get their ideas from.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so the next thing that runs through that's kind of important as a setting thing is Barrow and Lock Mining and Railroad Combine. And each of these towns, each of these counties has very strong connections to B&L. It's a big thing running throughout the seasons. Yeah. They own everything.
Yeah, that's what it seems like. They've got pretty much all the mines in the region. They've either started the mines or bought them up. Their rail lines are just spreading everywhere. And it's not just a monopoly, it seems like. It's kind of a metaphysical cancer in a lot of ways.
Yep.
Wherein a lot of the residents of these towns that have been taken over by Barrow and Locke, or BNL as it's sometimes called, they seem to be these kind of emotionless, tired husks. But one thing that's kind of alluded to, I'm not sure how true this is. Maybe, Dave or Crystal, you can kind of jump in. But it seems like the further you get from the headquarters of Barrow, there's a lot more of these residents in these towns that get more uncontrollable and violent. And
So
bit of a problem for the setting.
that is both a combination of, here's my history interjection here. That is both a combination of some magic influence, but also the fighting for unionization that happened like throughout all of these companies in the Appalachian region. Like they were one of the biggest places to start unionizing because of all of that stuff. And so that like anger and violence and stuff like that is fed from two outside sources meeting each other and starting those flames.
Yeah, it's a theme that runs through the book. It's a theme that runs through the podcast as well.
Mm-hmm.
This whole, as we said at the beginning, this whole thing fighting the big corporation. BNL in this setting are that corporation. So you can use them if you want to run a game of this, and you want to go into kind of more personal horror. Use BNL as that corporation. You fight for your family's right. You fight to own your own house. You fight to own your own job. You fight to earn US dollars rather than script, and stuff like that. However, BNL are not just a company.
No.
In the podcast,
there's some American gods thrown in there.
Yes. Anything else, Mike?
No, I think just one of the things, Crystal is completely right. There was a lot of labor action going on here in this region at that time. One of the craziest examples, which is not talked about in this book, but and I would be careful about actually using it in your game, but there was actually a situation where the United Mine Workers Union Association literally fought against the U.S. Army while they were attempting to strike. So there's a lot of crazy history in this exact time period in this region.
Yeah, there are families that are still alive from that fought in that.
Yeah,
which is why you want to be careful with that stuff.
Yep.
And obviously, it's not this region, but you've got things like the Pinkertons are arriving and turning up. And obviously, we've seen modern news resurgence. So do be careful with these ideas, as you say. Yeah. But right. So that, I suppose, gives you an overview of the regions and kind of things and the history of the place. Let's delve more now into a little bit of the creepy stuff, the stuff that we like here that's less political and more cosmological. So the book states, and I'm going to say this straight out rather than where I put it in the notes. The book states that it has a very big section on magic and what the world is and how it interacts and things like that. And you go into it and you find it, and it's a page and a half. Now, for the setting, when you listen to the podcast and you read through it and you hear all these wonderful things, you think, oh, cool, there's going to be an amazing deep dive into the cultural and rural folklore and folk magic and all this kind of stuff, and you get very little. And considering this is such a big part of not just the podcast, but the region itself, I feel they really missed a trick here.
So it's definitely I think it's a cool concept. that's discussed in obviously the podcast and discussed in the, half a page in this book, wherein the magic is, coming from the land rather than ritual magic, which I'm sure Dave will kind of get into. I I don't know why there isn't a more complex system here. Obviously, we're going to be talking about mechanics next episode. I wonder if part of that is due to limitations of the kind of pre-built cipher system, and they just wanted to stick with that rather than trying to make an entirely new system.
So for me, it wasn't so much
yeah.
that there's no system for it, because there is a little bit of a system, as you say, with the ciphers and stuff. There's no description of the magic, how you do it, what you do. Ciphers, because this is obviously Monte Cook's ciphers. Ciphers are objects that you get to use to do things. It's not like I'm going out and I'm going to perform a divination using these herbs and this thing and that thing. There's none of that description in here. There's none of the description of the folklore of the plants. So what herbs do I need to go out? What plants do I need to pick? What mushrooms are safe? What ones aren't? It misses a very big key part of, to me, what makes Appalachia so different as a culture to the rest of white America. Mm-hmm. It has a very distinct folklore tradition, and it's missing in this book. I don't know whether that's because they're going to bring it into in when they do more stuff, because we've just found out that there's going to be a new book coming summer, Deep something or other. What's it called? I don't know what it's called, but
Deeper Dives.
No, that's us.
No, it's Deep something.
Deep something, but yeah. So the Deeper Still.
Deeper Still. There we go.
Yeah. So there is another book coming. Whether that they're going to dive into it in there, and they've left it for that, remains to be seen. But I do feel that they missed a trick here. But that may be because of the way they wanted to promote it. So
I have a couple of ideas on why that might have been missed. And it's because when you have a writing team, right, not everybody is going to be an expert in that subject. Mm-hmm. And it is very possible that while the writer of the podcast knows folk magic, he may not, or they may not, can't remember which one. He may not actually know how to put that in game terms.
Yeah.
And so that might have just been kind of glossed over, because you don't want to give folk magic, especially Appalachian folk magic, can be very dangerous, because you are working with plants that are poisonous and can kill you. And so
you don't want to give players these things that they might then go out and actually.
Yeah, so like they may have been like, like Monte Cook may have been like, we don't want to make a how-to on how to unalive yourself. Yeah. So I can see some of the things as to why they wouldn't have done some of that, but there's still more things they could have added. Yeah. Like the whole making connections with like the threads of why they are using certain plants. So we use this certain plant for this tincture because this tincture will make us do this one thing.
Actually, there is a bit in the book that will explain, actually might answer why they've not given the folklore of the plants. And I'll come to that in a minute. So there might actually be a reason for the plants. But it was, I'm re-going through the podcast again, because I've not listened to it for ages, so I thought I'd just redo everything. And there's an episode in season 2 with Cowboy, who's a child character who weird things happen, and he goes to the walk. So spoiler for anybody who's listening, this is not a spoiler for the story. I'm not going to try and spoil the story, but there's a divination that happens with Cowboy.
Yep.
Where one of the Walker sisters, I think Marcy, takes an egg and runs it over his body. Mm-hmm. to work out if anything bad is within the body. And this is a well-known, not just Appalachian, but also an old Scottish form of divination. But we don't even get that in the book. So it's just, there's just things that they could have just put small little things in, like they've got throughout the whole book, like little side notes, just saying in season 2, episode blah, they do this, to give you hints. But anyway, that's my biggest foible about this whole thing. I think one of the things another way you can probably think about this and the way it's written as a book is it's basically Call of Cthulhu in Appalachia. And we'll come to those Cthulhu vibes soon. So,
and the other thing that I want to point out, which is that magic is separate from religion.
Yes.
And this is a big thing. That's an actual thing, because you have Catholic and Christian practitioners of magic, because magic is older than their religion.
Yes. Yeah. Even though this is early 1900s where everybody is Christian, the grannies, it's called granny magic, which I think is a brilliant name.
I love that so much.
They've called it granny magic. Even though there's this, and you get all the Baptist church and you get all the Pentecostal stuff going throughout it, granny magic is still very much a thing, and everybody believes it.
Mm-hmm. And nobody talks about it. They're like, we know who you need to go to.
Yeah,
but
we ain't going to
tell you
visit my
happen.
auntie because I've got problems. Everyone knows it, but nobody says it.
Yep.
So, yeah. It's kind of like what would happen in England and Scotland and Wales and Ireland and France and Germany in the 16th and 17th centuries, and it's starting to lose it in the 18th, 19th century because of industrialization and whatever, not the Reformation, Enlightenment and things like this are going off in Europe, and the people who've moved to Appalachia are people who are still holding these traditions, and they're not being influenced by this massive shift in thinking of Europe. So they're still, it's your cunning folk kind of idea. But right, so we've had our rant, and we'll delve
hold on, I'm just going to jump in on something on granny magic. It reminds me of something that I watched recently, which is another maybe monster film to go watch as inspiration, because it does feature granny magic, is Pumpkinhead.
Yes.
That's in and around Appalachia.
Yeah, no, Pumpkin.
Brilliant. That's a Stan Winston monster movie.
I actually watched that again.
I
watched that a few days ago as well.
Yeah, I think it was on whichever horror channel to stream.
Just been released on Prime or something. Yeah.
It fits the it fits the setting totally.
Yeah, Pumpkin very much.
I also want to kind of point out that the antagonist magic, like the bad stuff magic, is not the magic of the people. It's not the folk magic.
We'll come to that. We'll come to that. So
because that's kind of an important distinction there.
There's a very, as we say, in this setting, the bad things are bad. But we'll come to the inner dark soon. So as we've said, the first people you go to with magic, if you've got a problem, if you're ill, or where things are happening, you go to a granny, you go to your auntie, someone who has granny magic. And we know this commonly as cunning magic herbalcraft. One of the key things about this is not ceremonial magic. This is not your Solomonic. This is not your chaos magic. This is not your Thelema. It is ritual. It does have ritual elements to it, but it is not that ritualistic side. You don't need any special things for it. It is old. It is of the land. It is learnt, and it is not written down. It is herbs, songs, dances, charms, spells of the lands, animistic. So everything has a connection to everything else. So you don't need to dress up funny, have a wand, recite 700 lines and call on the demons and God to do things in this. So there's a herb for cough, there's a charm for protection, dancers for the snows, etc., etc. You can use. There are some times where you'll use things like wands and stuff, but this is more for like dowsing for wells or speaking with the dead spirits of the land, for heal or harm. So even though this is seen as a good form of magic, you can still use it to curse people. There are curses and hexes within it.
Can I share a quick anecdote?
Yep, jump
about
in.
Dowsing rods. So
I'm not going to get into what they are and why they're all a load of crap, but
well, no, we are. Well, a little bit.
Okay.
So I found an engineering paper by the U.S. government investigating if dowsing rods worked or not. They found out that they don't, but it is crazy to me that the U.S. government spent money.
Wait,
just check. They're like, just check this. We don't think it works, but maybe.
I can top you on that because currently with the state of the privatization of all of the waterworks in the UK. I don't know why it was ever privatized.
It's a weird form of privatization. Yeah, it's also a weird form of privatization because it's still owned by the government, but it's private companies owned by the. It's weird.
It's a monopoly. You can't just change who your provider is just like that. It doesn't change shit anyway. Besides
Thames Water, yay!
Beside the point that UK waters are filled with shit and all the fish are high on coke, is yeah. So
it's a thing. It's a thing.
Yeah. Anyway, even recently, and I don't know when recently, but fairly recently, dowsing rods have been used by, I think, Thames Water to detect.
Yeah.
I was gonna
breakages. It's like, are you fucking kidding me?
I know there was a big thing in the 80s that they would hire people to douse for breakages and stuff. I know it was definitely in the 80s.
So here's a funny story. When my parents were building their house, they used dowsing rods to find our well water, where to put our well. So our whole house was built on dowsing rods.
Oh, interesting. It's like, I think dowsing rods came out at the same time as the idea of ley lines. And ley lines, that whole thing is like a complete and utter fabrication and completely made up around this kind of time as well. So like the 1910s, 1920s. A lot of stuff came out around this time because of a certain woman who made complete and utter sideward leaps in every way, shape, or form and ended up with Gerald Gardner at the end of it. But Margaret Murray, you've got to love her. But yeah, moving on from that before I say things that might offend people. So we've got this. We've got heal, harm, fertility of the land and beast. So it's a very nature-based form of magic. It's not written down, as I said. It's spoken. It's an oral tradition passed down from one generation to the next. Each family line will have their own spells and traditions and cures and curses and herbal remedies and things like that. But even within the families, the spells will change and they will be different. So if you've got a family who lives in a holler and they're all spread out, maybe at the top end of the holler you'll get some flowers, so the granny at that end will use those herbs and flowers, and at the bottom end where the creek has turned into a stream and is turning into a river, you'll get different flowers, and so you'll end up with different things different where. So this is kind of maybe why we're not seeing a description, because the magic is personal. It's learnt through how you practice and what is available to you in the region where you live. But it's just not well explained.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think they could have explained that better.
Yeah, they could have explained it. I concur. I do understand what you're saying, David. I understand how the developers might have thought that as well, because it might be the kind of easy way out. But probably
you can still
give us more detail or guidelines.
Guidelines or examples or something, or even just said we're not doing this because everybody does something different. The only reason I've come up with this is because I've talked it through with you guys now, and I'm like, maybe that's why they did it.
Maybe When you were talking about this and speaking, that's exactly what I was thinking. Like, oh, maybe that's why they aren't giving us much detail. But still, probably should have.
Probably should have said something.
I don't want to beat a dead horse
They have
here.
so many sidebars. That could have been a sidebar. We're not going to give you the details because it's a personal thing. We want you to develop that as a character.
Yeah.
Ooh, actually, Crystal, from a development standpoint, there's a lot of sidebars and a lot of margins with text in them. If they eliminated a lot of those margins, do you think they could have fit in a magic system with more depth?
So I will say yes, there's a lot. I will also say that some of the sidebars that they have actually are like, go to page 23 for this, because it wasn't in the text. And I do like that because I know that like some of the Warhammer stuff also does that too. And I find that to be super helpful as a GM.
Super helpful.
So yes and no. I yes, there are a lot of them, and do I think all of them are necessary? Not really. Do I find them to be super helpful? Absolutely.
Yeah, but it's also the here. Yeah, but as you say, there's a lot of sidebars as well.
There are.
Almost every page has at least one. A lot of them are direct quotes from the podcast. I'm not sure all of them are needed. I think you could probably reduce this to an under 400 page book easily. I think, what is it, 440?
There's 418 pages, I think.
Yeah, it's a big book. It's a very big book. Mm-hmm. It's very pretty. I'll give it that. It's very pretty. Right. Anyway, moving on. So magic, as we're saying, it's a very much a life form. It grows and changes and is ever evolving. So this may be, as we say, maybe the reason why they've not included much information on it. So, what is the magic? In this game, it is known as the green. Oh, excuse me. And this is the human magic. This is the granny magic. This is your cunning man magic. It's elemental. It's hollow medicine. It's granny and natural world. It's growth and decay. So because it is natural and it is based around nature, it's life and death, growth and decay. It has those elements to it. And there are it gives you example characters from the podcast are put into the book of people who will use this. So we have the Kudzu man, who's a big leafy greeny boy. He appears every now and then as either a helper or a not very helpful thing. He's elephant size, he's huge, and he's just a big cluster of leaves and vines. He's animated by the power of the green. Limited intelligence, probably a dog kind of level. But he can sense if a creature or human or thing has a respectful connection to nature, or if it profanes the earth and plants. So the purpose of the Kudzu man is to obscure and tear down infractions against nature. So this is pretty much your angry nature spirit, who is called upon by the one of the witches. But yeah, it's huge. Then you've got the Witch Queen. The Witch Queen she serves the green, but does have a link to the thing whose name sounds like horned head, but is not. And we'll come to who they are in a bit. I don't really want to say too much about her because the spoilers, but she's in there. She serves the green, but is not of the green. And then you get Bartholomew, who is basically the Witch Queen's pet. It's kind of like it's a bear-like creature. Could also look like a man. Very, very strange. Also can disappear into the earth again. So again, another kind of nature spirit. So these are three characters. They have a full stat sheet and everything in there, so you can fully interact and use them in the book. So yeah. So this is, as I say, it's not ritualistic magic. It's not Solomonic or chaos. There are no special clothes. Blah 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 blah. I've done all that. Okay, skipping ahead. So who are the old gods? So we've done all the kind of the stuff where we wish where there was folklore, and now we're going to go into cosmic horror, not Cthulhu, honest region of the book. So who are the old gods? And how do they connect to magic? So aeons and aeons ago, before people really, there were creatures of immense power and madness that, after a big fight, were trapped beneath the mountains. Back when they were younger and back when the mountains were younger and larger, towering peaks covered in snow, steep sides, and forbidding slopes. These became a prison for the dark forces. So, underneath the Appalachian Mountains are creatures. This is a prison. Time has worn on, and the mad powers slumbered. But as with anything, time wears thin. As we've spoken about already, they're about 20% as tall as they were. So the mountains have changed. They are smaller. The walls between the prison wear thin, and those that slumber begin to stir. And they begin to call out to any that will hear them. And some have heard that call. There are creatures who have answered and now follow and serve to bring the land back to their masters, turning it dark and bloody. There are also those who can tap into this power. There are humans and there are beings and use the powers either for good or ill. So the green is not connected to this, but there may be witches or cunning folk who can also tap into this ancient cosmic power for good. It is power that is unknowable, and it cares and doesn't care what you want, really. But one that it still currently sleeps. You can kind of get a little trickle of it and things. You can make favors and bargains with these creatures, or serve them, but there's always a price. And don't dig too deep or greedily because, well, listen to the episode about digging a hole through a mountain and you might find out. Or you might find what is known as the things. So the things, these are basically the creatures and entities that connects themselves to those who sleep beneath. So these creatures who sleep beneath the mountains, who are prisoned. And they work with something called the inner dark. The inner dark is the power of these creatures. It is what they exist as. It is their magic. This magic is wholly separate from the green. This is your Cthulhu-esque, your Lovecraftian, your darker, deeper, unknowable power. So there is a hierarchy to these things. We have low things, middle things, deep things, and those who sleep beneath, or old things, for very simple naming techniques. So the low things, these are often mindless creatures. They're just servitors, hunting dogs, reanimated corpses, or unnatural wildlife. In the book, they give a list of examples. So you've got beasts of the dark earth, who are connected to the dead queen. They're weird living creatures of bone, death, fouled earth, plant matter, and debris. They're actually, I suppose you could probably use them something like Pumpkin Man, Pumpkinhead, something like that, but they're not intelligent. They're completely controlled. They're misshapen approximations of animals and things. You then get blank-eyed men. These are humans. These are mindless puppets. They are minions used for simple labor. They dress and look like normal people, but they feel no pain. They have blank eyes and slack jaws, no facial expressions. We then get hollow men, which are similar to blank-eyed men. but they can be more easily controlled, I suppose. They're completely hollow. They've got no mind whatsoever, and they're completely filled with the power of darkness. During the day, they look like normal people, but at night, they can become completely monstrous. And they are. Trying to think of the word. Can't think of the word here. But yeah, they're inanimate, dead, and controlled by somebody.
Sort of a revenant.
That's the word I was looking for. Yes,
kind of a possessed revenant. Yeah,
yeah.
I thought these were kind of interesting, because obviously this book doesn't steal wholesale from folklore of the region, but this does have some kind of mythic resonance of some stories I've heard of, like the men in black in this region, where there's these kind of dapperly dressed individuals that are very peculiar, very strange, showing up to like harass residents of Point Pleasant after the Silver Bridge collapse, for example. It's interesting, but it's also kind of another level of the Revenant, obviously, and I think there's another one that'll pop up later.
Yeah, there's talking about that kind of Men in Black idea of people turning up onto it. That's the Hollow Men are used in that kind of way within, especially season 1 of the podcast. They're used in that way, but they're also again used as muscle as well. So you get this kind of business side of them, and then they've not done the business side, so at night they become this other thing, and then good luck fighting them. So yeah, we then get the hounds. These are hairless, blue-skinned creatures, dogs, fighty, bitey, covered in spines and stones and weird things. So they are nightmare fuel. These are your black dogs. These are your devil dogs, but taken to that weird horror extreme.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the description in here is ridiculous. They're like burning gold sun eyes, and there's also, I think, like little red eyes popping off the sides of them, these huge tusks and these spiny protrusions. The verbal description or written description, I should say, is horrific enough, but also the art in the book is pretty scary. So I approve. I like them.
Yeah, they did well with the art there, because it's like, oh, it's just a scary dog. No, my God. No. So yeah, they've done that quite well. Then we get the middle things. Mike, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, absolutely. So the middle things tend to be more powerful than those previous servitors that we were discussing. They usually have more autonomy and thinking minds, and of course they are not, the things that are slumbering beneath. They're just kind of possessions of them. They don't really have their own independence, I think, is really the best thing to say. So, one example is the Lamp-eyed Dead, who are these really insidious, malicious, and very petty beings, which are typically ones that made some sort of a bargain that came due, and now they're basically possessed by this these other older beings that sleep beneath. They usually have glowing eyes, I think glowing red eyes typically, and they're really just being controlled like puppets and children's toys. They have kind of an inhuman glee to their faces, but they kind of move reluctantly, typically. And of course, when the beings have no more use for them and kind of ends their possession, these just collapse as corpses because they've already been dead this entire time. So pretty good for games. A bit, they're very sinister looking. It's pretty obvious that these beings are up to no good when they show up. But they, again, have a bit more autonomy than some of the previous things we were talking about. So there could be a bit more interaction between these and the characters. Yeah. But of course, if, and again, this might not be consistent with the podcast, but if the being controlling them really takes an interest, they will lose all autonomy basically and just be, fully controlled.
Yeah.
Following that, another pretty cool one is the Gray Ladies, which are not the Gray Ladies of ghost stories. They're these inhuman creatures that serve the thing whose name sounds like horned head but is not. Which
Such
is
a
quite the
wonderful
mouthful.
name. It's just like, why?
Yeah, it is pretty extreme. And they mostly move around seeking to return artifacts that have been taken from him. So they have a bit more of a mission and are a bit more focused than some of these other ones. He filled these 3 willing human vessels with minds that were torn, screaming from the inner dark, and gestated them in the hearts of rotting trees, and then birthed them into the world as his servants and daughters. So they're kind of the Victorian Gray Ladies of ghost stories. These kind of pale women with large gray eyes, but they are not ghosts. They're actual, physical beings. They tend to have a timeless look, and one is a young woman, one is middle-aged, the other is older. So kind of like the maid, the woman, and the crone kind of vibe as well. And they can get pretty scary in a pinch, definitely, and that's where the nightmare fuel of them kind of comes out, with like kind of tubular arms and fangs and all that kind of stuff. So pretty cool. Definitely good to use in this game, or grab for another horror setting as well.
Yeah, I really like the Grey Ladies, because if people don't know what they are, you kind of run them in a game, you go, oh look, there's just these 3 Victorian ghostly women floating around doing stuff. Oh, it's just going to be a normal ghost hunt, and then suddenly, oh crap, they're scary, they're scary. Run away. You can kind of mess around with people who think they know but don't. So, like, they're creatures who can throw old, huge oak church pews across a room and stuff, even though they're slight and slender.
Certainly, and
they got big
there's a
vampire
good bait
teeth.
and switch in that regard. But Crystal, you're very familiar with this setting. Do the Gray Ladies, do they have much like personality to them? That's something I didn't really get from the description here.
So the Gray Ladies have like a flat personality. They are able to kind of try to convince you that they aren't what they are, but they generally stay focused on what they're trying to do. So it's basically like yeah, I'm here, move out of my way, please. I'm going this way.
Understood. So it's that kind of hyper-focused element.
Yeah.
So, so that's interesting.
It's that same thing of like, they have autonomy to some extent.
Yep.
Yeah, interesting.
And sometimes if their thing is, if their directive is to do a particular thing, and to get to that particular thing they have to manipulate somebody, then they are free to do whatever manipulation they need to get there.
Yeah. They're a standard kind of horror trope, but done in a very different way, and I kind of like the way that they've been brought in to the game and the podcast. So
yeah,
it's a really interesting thing. So a lot of the creatures, like this, we're going to go into quite a few of them. They're kind of standard ideas that you will recognize from other places and other games, but they've definitely been given a very unique look and feel within this setting. So when we get to the others, things that are not connected to the Inner Dark or the Green, it's directly, there's some very interesting characters within that. But moving on, we then get deep things, low, middle, and deep. These are your true cosmic horrors. These are creatures that once slept but are now awake. They're not those who sleep beneath. They're not the true gods, but they are very much agents of these. These were imprisoned and were asleep with them. They are often inhuman. in form, whereas the others try to at least appear to be human. These don't. They can appear human, but it does take a lot of effort, and they're varying in age, power, strength, and things. And the world, the inherent nature of the world, wants to end them. They are so anti-nature and anti-life and anti, I suppose, Gaia, if you want to think about it like that, that the world is actively trying to kill them. And many of them have been destroyed and sent back down to below and reshaped and recreated and come back, depending upon their strength. Others have existed for eons and decades and centuries. So these are things there. So the examples, the big example, and who is the big one who runs through out the podcast, has many names. So we've already heard one, the thing whose name sounds like Horned Head but is not. Don't know why they start and use that one throughout most of the book when he's got other easier names, which is the Beast, the Black Stag, the Lord of the Night and of the Forest Day, the Betrayer, the Black Judas, and things like that. So Old Horny. There's other names that they could have used, but throughout the book they use the thing whose name sounds like Horned Head but is not. Just to make you have a massive mouthful.
Yeah, indeed. Well, maybe that's what maybe that's the preferred name from the podcast creators. Not really sure.
I think that it's more of a clarification, because if I remember correctly, like when it first started coming out, the way that it was said in there, it sounded like Hornet Head.
Yes,
because it was supposed like he was supposed to have because of the accent. And so I think that this is more of a clarification on the fact that it is not Hornet Head. It probably was Horned Head, or something very similar to it, but because of the accent, everyone was mishearing it.
Yeah, and getting more heart or the city below kind of vibes, and everybody running around with bees coming out of their mouth.
Yeah.
So he's got loads of names. He's very, very important. He is quite a strong character throughout. Definitely season 1, and he appears throughout the rest of the seasons. But he's very, very important. So, he's a creature that needs to be respected, feared, and probably avoided. If you see him, try not to interact with him, because then bad things are going to happen.
But don't run away.
Don't run away, but don't engage. He's a thing of the dark. He's a thing of the inner dark. He's old, but not the oldest. Though he possibly is the cruelest and most petty. He likes to sow distrust or destruction to people. So even though he appears to be one of the most powerful creatures around, he's actually beholden to more powerful things, and they're going to be next. Because if the more powerful beings came out, bad things are going to happen. He is almost godlike to mortal creatures, to humans. He appears godlike. He appears like, think of things like movies like The Ritual and stuff like that. It's that kind of ancient elder folklore horned god creature. Pan, but evil. So it's kind of that idea is who this is.
Yeah, in my personal headcanon,
I just read your note.
I know. In my personal headcanon that I noted here, I'm getting the feeling, and I'm not very familiar with the stuff with the podcast, but I feel like he's either Randall Flagg or Nyarlathotep. That's really the vibe I'm getting, and I think it would be kind of cool if this was that character, which was created by Lovecraft and then used by Stephen King, and then has translated into this dimension as well. But I understand if people want to go in a different direction with them.
Would it not be also a fit for the Black Goat and Shub-Nugaroth?
Maybe. The fact that this individual is working with these other entities, it's kind of like a mouthpiece for these other gods. That's where I'm getting the Nyarlathotep vibe from. But the kind of unnatural nature side as well could be could definitely be representative of Shub if you wanted to compare it to the Cthulhu mythos.
Yeah, I think the next ones we're going to come to definitely speak more to the actual elder gods of the Cthulhu mythos, because the beast, the black stag, is not a god. It is I suppose you could say it's an emissary of these creatures.
He's the recruiter.
Yeah.
He is the most tolerable out of all of the horrors. And so they send him to go and be like, hey, you're going to come work for us now. No, you don't have a choice.
But he's like, the way he interacts as well is very much, he's not outright just going to rip your head off or anything. He's going to try and bribe, bargain, deal with you. Even though he is horror incarnate, he wants you, so he's not going to kill you. So you get that kind of deep dark with it as well. So whereas the middle things and the low things are servants who will, if they're told to just go out and rip your head off, they'll do what they're told. This thing is given the freedom to interact with you in whatever way it deems necessary to bring you to the inner dark.
Indeed. Do you feel like this entity kind of chafes at its position, though, as being stuck as the recruiter?
Yes.
I think it wants to be a god, to be honest.
It wants to join them, yeah.
Cool.
Especially like if you in season 1 and you hear the way it talks to people, it very much thinks that it is the power. So yeah. So he in the game and in the podcast is the most powerful creature you will come across. Anything more powerful than him, well, there may be one or two, but in the current setting and the way the book is written, so this is different to obviously the way the podcast runs for reasons. There is maybe one other character who is stronger, but in the way the book is written, they are not. And I'll come to that in a bit. But yeah, he is the big bad of the big bad entity that you can meet. Because if we move on to those who sleep beneath the old things, these are basically very, very Lovecraftian. They are beings of darkness and consumption, and they are trapped for one very specific reason. They lost the war and got put into this prison because they want to destroy the universe. And if they become free, we can say goodbye to the universe. They will eat the universe. They are that powerful. They don't care about the world. They don't care about you. They don't care about anything. All they want to do is fuck everything up and destroy it all. This is why they don't exist as playable entities that you can deal with, because if they exist, then nothing exists. They are that kind of level. They are the true cosmic, unknowable horror. And I think I'll let you give that note, Mike, because I kind of like that. Your thoughts on them?
Yeah, it's kind of Call of Cthulhu meets creepypasta. That's kind of the vibe I was getting from this as I read through.
So I think that's the vibe of the whole game, to be honest.
Indeed. Now, I mean, this game is not Call of Cthulhu. It actually has a lot of mechanical differences. I want to make that clear. And obviously, this has a lot of the ways in which characters will interact with this mythos is quite different than Call of Cthulhu, despite this being set in a very similar time period. But if this was going to be the Polygon article for Old Gods of Appalachia, it would be like, oh, check out this game, Call of Cthulhu meets creepypasta. Yeah, but I also like that they did not stat out the evil gods, because that was kind of ridiculous when that's been done in other games.
It's folk horror Call of Cthulhu. That's all it is. That's the best way to, I think, about it. Is like, you've got your older god that you do meet, who is the Black Stag, but there's always a power behind that. And folklore and folk horror, there's always something worse that you don't want to interact with. So, yeah, so that's kind of the main cosmological setup of the game, I suppose. They're the main creatures. There's loads of others in there, other than just the examples we went through for the lower mid and things. But there's also creatures who are not connected directly to the green or the inner dark. They are the others. So things like ghosts, monsters, and other entities, beasts of legends and myths that come out through time. So this is kind of where we do actually start to see a connection to actual Appalachian folklore. So some of these do come from real Appalachian folklore, but we've got the Dead Queen. She appears every 7 years, depending on the ritual. She is very much a woman that men should not piss off. So this is the fuck misogyny character in the podcast and in the book. She's brutal. So
team, we're working for her when we do the adventure, right?
She is the Fafo female character.
Yeah. You don't get a choice of who you work for, I feel, in a lot of Old Gods. It's just kind of like, that creature is in the region where you are. Do their thing. And kind of connected to the what's she called, the Dead Queen, you also get the boy, who he's definitely a haint. He's
I don't think we've explained what haints are for those that don't know.
okay. Yeah. Do you want to explain what haints are, Crystal?
Yeah, haints are very, very angry ghosts and spirits. There is a lot of folklore around them, like actual folklore, including a color that people will paint their porches called haint blue, that is supposed to keep them from entering your home, because they will do that. There's also like other things like broomsticks being put out there, cinnamon and salt and stuff like that being blown at the door. But yeah, they're basically very angry spirits.
Yeah, cool. And in this setting, haints do exist. There are ghosts and things like that. And the boy is an even more angry haint.
Yep.
They are a spirit of death. So this being Appalachia, 1910s, 1920s, there's a lot of mining going on. There's a lot of hard labor, and kids, if even 10, even 8 or 7 years old, are sent off to work in the mines. And this is the spirit of those children who have been lost. And it ain't happy. And it ain't alone. Run. Run fast. Especially if you own the mine and you see this child. Sorry, but you're probably not going to survive this. But they appear as ghosts as well, so they are. You can quite easily tell who they are. They know the crimes and the secrets of those they have chosen as their target, so they know everything about you, and they want to make you suffer for what you have done. So yeah, the boy adds in a very, very creepy personal fear that I think that many people would have, which is, one is the horrible nature of the time that they lived in and the loss of a child, but also that they know your secrets. They know the bad shit you've done, and they are going to punish you for it. For me, they are one of the creepiest, scariest things in the setting. I always also get a slight Doctor Who vibe from it.
Oh god, yeah.
Are
Yep.
you my mummy?
that kind of feeling. If you want to kind of maybe bring it to a more modern setting, you've got that kind of idea with it. So yeah, that's The Boy. I think we should only do 2 more here because there's a load more and we've gone on for quite a bit. I think the next one is quite an important character in the podcast, and especially in season 4, they become, especially at the time that we're recording this, they're going through some interesting life events. I don't know if Crystal is aware of what's going on at the moment in the podcast. I'm not. I've only been told roughly about it. I've not listened to it yet, so
it's been a bit. I actually have to catch up. That's actually one thing I want to do. Start doing.
Yeah.
Again, so.
I'm not going to spoil it for anybody, but yeah, they're going through some interesting life events. So this is J.T. Fields III, or more oftenly known as Jack. This is I think, possibly the one creature or person in the setting who is more powerful than the beast or the black stag, because they are old. They are the oldest living creature around that is not trapped below the mountains, because they are the prisoner. Not the prisoner, the prison guard. That's the word. They're not the prisoner. The old ones are the prisoner. So yeah, Jack is the prison keeper. He was the one who looked after the prison. He was the jailer. That's the word I'm looking for. But he didn't particularly like doing that. So he's also kind of to blame a little bit as to why everything's kind of going the way it is. So he kind of got bored and wandered off and liked to travel. He's kind of your trickster god, I suppose, of old gods. He's your Loki. He's your Anansi. He's your coyote. So he likes to go off, likes to travel, likes to scheme. In the current setting, he can be a snake oil salesman or something like that. The way that he appears. Sometimes he appears as a lawyer. Depending on whatever scheme he's running at the time is depending on how he will appear. But also facially wise and things, he doesn't stand out. He doesn't look like this ancient being, kind of indeterminate age. So he's super interesting in the podcast. They don't cover much on him in the book, unfortunately, but I think within the podcast, he's super, super interesting.
I think there's a reason why, and I think it's because they knew they were centering him in the coming season. They didn't want to spoil anything.
Yeah, so I think maybe in Deeper Still, the next book, we might hear more about him. But yeah, I love him as a concept. So yeah, Mike?
Yeah. I think it's a great concept. Like having that kind of mysterious figure that knows so much more than they're really letting on is it's a key staple of a lot of mystery and horror fiction. As you were talking about him, kind of reminded me of Cagliostro from the Spawn comic books, and there's also a character, I can't remember their name, in Carnival, that old HBO show that really works for this guy as well.
Yes, I love that show.
Yeah, and actually, again, Carnival fits in the same exact time period as this game, so could be good inspiration for a very different region.
Yeah, I think you could quite easily run that dark carnival idea with old gods, like have a traveling troupe going through the valleys and the hollows, visiting these towns, and yet they're working for the inner dark or something. I think it's a really fun idea you could play with.
There was a cool Ravenloft source book called, I think, just Carnival, and that one had a troupe that was kind of imprisoned in this world, traveling from basically region to region, kind of helping things, but also potentially harming as well, which I think could be some pretty good inspiration for this setting.
You could even jump into a classic Games Workshop game, More Time. You've got the Carnival of Chaos. Take some inspiration from there.
Certainly, yep.
Oh, I miss More Time. So anyway, one more, and then we'll kind of wrap up and things, because otherwise we're going to go on for hours. I think the next one we can look at is probably the Railroad Man, just because it's quite it's a different kind of idea.
This is
So
this is the American Gods reference that I made.
yeah. So as I say, this is where you can kind of start seeing it's not just American Gods. It's also I think it's Dickens, Dickens horror. There's the railroad story from Dickens. So it's a mysterious, tall, elegant man who has a titch of grey at his temples, which, if I had longer hair, you'd see. And his beard is thin, but mine's not. So it's kind of what I would ideally like to look like. I suppose you can think of him maybe as looks-wise, as a beardy, slender man from the 1910s in the way that he looks. He's smart dressed, he's tailored suit. He's got a familiar feeling about him. If you look at him quickly, you might go, "Oh, I recognize you," and things. But no, you don't. He walks like a foreman, confident and at home in the rain or mud. So, like he's used to being outside. Trains and tunnels and smelting steel don't bother him. But those who look closer and those who can truly see him, whether it's people using the sight or other supernatural things, they can pierce this human veil around him. And they get glimpses of those people who have been marked or destroyed by the railroad. He is the spirit of those who have died working the railroads, whether it's digging the tunnels, laying the tracks, the chain gangs. He is the image of pain and loss and violation resulting from the incessant drive to build this railroad. So again, it's kind of bringing that corporate greed, corporate desire for expansion, and the resultant horror that comes from that. But he's not a creature of the inner dark. He is not that. He is something that has manifested out of this greed and power. Almost, I suppose, in a way, in a bit like that Hindu idea of the stronger you believe and the stronger the emotion, the more likely something is to occur. And so he is that. And it's, I think, is a perfect creature for especially the setting, because you can adapt him to the miners, you can adapt him to the railroad, you can adapt him to the people who build the actual roads as well. So he's, yeah,
kind of an animistic personification of what's going on.
Very much
of capitalism run wild.
Yeah, and we get back to that whole idea of animistic. This is a very animistic setting over something like vampire or mage, which is probably more of the ritualistic side. So, so that's the I suppose these are the lore specific creatures that exist within Old Gods. These are the ones that they've created for the setting, even though they have kind of connections to actual folklore. There are other things in there. So there are other creatures. So they put Shuck in there, which is interesting because Shuck in Appalachia is not the devil dog of Norfolk. It's a small, miserable goblin-like creature, kind of almost like a boggart, I suppose. They've got a creature like that in there. You've got Tommy Knockers, who are obviously the Cornish knockers, and I should probably look at why it got the name Tommy added to it. I'm not quite sure. Do any of you know why they became Tommy Knockers instead of Knockers?
No. Don't know.
No.
I do want to point out one creature who is the bestest boy, which is Sam, the all good and indestructible. He is a blind basset hound.
Yep.
Basset Hound.
Oh, Sam. Yeah. Is he
Is it,
Basset
or
Hound?
Beagle? No, he's a Beagle.
Beagle. He's a Beagle. Yeah. Sam.
He
Sam
has
is beautiful.
he has plot armor. One of the biggest things in Old Gods of Appalachia is that pets are off limits unless everybody at the table consents to it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and so he's the representation of that, which is that pets are not harmed.
Yeah,
and that's big thing in the podcast too, where whenever a pet shows up, he reminds everybody, "Hey, pets have armor; they cannot be harmed in these stories."
Yeah. There's very much an anti-animal harm theme that runs throughout the whole podcast. Even though you've got these really dark, horrible creatures, most of the violence and horror happens to humans. It's very, very rare that you see harm and danger to animals and stuff. So, but Sam is a beautiful character. Is in the book. Is super. You can just whenever they describe how Sam is in the podcast, you're just like, oh, I want one, please. So he exists in there. Then you've also got other things. You've got Vampus and the Snallygaster, who is a German Schnellergeist. So you get parts of the old folklore from Europe that is still in there. So that's unfortunately about all of the real Appalachian folklore that they include, though. And as we've said, it's I feel that they have missed a trick. So I as you know, I'm a massive nerd of my folklore, and I was hoping to get a lot more information about Appalachian folklore within this, but it is what it is. It is a good book as it is, but I do think they massively missed a trick, unfortunately.
Yeah. And, I'm not a listener of the Old Gods podcast, so I don't know how much of that really is in that radio drama. But one thing I will say is that I think it's good that the radio drama and this book didn't just go in to just steal wholesale, elements of West Virginia cryptids or just copy the folklore, which could be a very easy crutch for writers to use. I think they really put a lot of effort into creating something that was very unique, and has its own take. We've obviously identified some of the things that I took inspiration from, and that's totally fine. That's always going to happen. Not everything is something created whole cloth from just from someone's imagination. Everything has echoes and resonance of previous mythology and stories. But yeah, certainly, as David pointed out, if you want to get that folklore information, you're just gonna have to look somewhere else. And there's plenty of books out there that explore this. Maybe for one of the forthcoming episodes on Old Gods, we should do a little research and see if we can find some references for people to check out for folklore.
Yeah, definitely. We can definitely find some books. Or Crystal's grinning there. I'm sure she's probably got a lot.
Oh yeah.
It's not my area of expertise in folklore. Very much more European and maybe Asian.
I got
so it's something I would love to know more about, which is, I suppose, why I'm kind of disappointed. I wanted to know a little bit more, especially the magic. It's not so much the creatures and the cryptids and things. It's more of like that folk magic that I wanted a little bit more information on. But they have done an absolute wonderful job of creating their own universe. I'm not going to ever deny that. It is a beautiful setting. What they have done, I really like. I love the podcast. There's another couple of podcasts that are of the similar vein that I also love.
And I do kind of want to also point out that like things like the knot deer not being connected with the old ones was actually a really good thing, because that is indigenous folklore, and a lot of times the indigenous folklore and belief get turned into this is the bad thing. And they're like, no, this exists. It's not good, but it's not the reason why it's the bad thing.
I think maybe one of the reasons, as you say, indigenous beliefs, and there are still people who live these lives within these communities. So it's still a living folklore. So you have to tread carefully when you try to bring these things into a game to not fuck it up. Like bringing in if you bringing in indigenous cultures, black cultures into a horror setting. There's been far too many times where it's like, aha, all these things are the bad things. We're going to fuck your culture. It's like, no, don't do that. So I can understand why they may have stepped away from a lot of these ideas. And what they did with the Not Deer, I think is brilliant. I kind of want to go out and find one.
No, you don't.
Go pet it. Which eye am I looking into? Sorry, what? But yeah, so when you go through it, if you look at they're called the others. So they don't connect to the green, they don't connect to the inner dark, but they tend to be more of the European-based creatures rather than bringing in the indigenous cultures that exist at the time and still exist. So yeah. What I think we should do, so Chris, obviously you don't know the podcast or the setting very well. From what we've just talked about, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I think, like, from my interest of things that are like adjacent to it, like in other similar media. So I've mentioned like Silent Hill. I guess also the type of stuff that type of vibe sometimes on like Ghost Adventures when they obviously do, exploring abandoned places that are in that region, and like we said, Pumpkinhead, that type of thing. I think that vibe I get and I think is interesting. I think what I am most probably curious about is how the book lays out how you run a game to, what is the vibe of this game?
Oh,
If that
that
makes sense.
Yeah.
I think that the like the Adventures does a really good way, like a really good job of outlining, like matching the vibe of the podcast without it actually being you're just replaying the podcast.
Yeah.
And so I think it keeps a lot of that a lot of the cultural aspects of that area without it being either over the top and silly or appropriative.
Yeah. I think that they do that very, very well. It's like,
Yeah.
you can, there's obviously easy ways to ham this up and turn it into hammer horror. There's also easy ways to make it become appropriative and all stuff like that. There's this really wonderful balance of this is not what you do, this is what you can do. And even the podcast as well itself is very much, we're aware of the fuckery. We're not going to do that. We're going to be culturally sensitive, I suppose, is a way of saying it. But you'll obviously see in a couple of weeks how the game plays and how the scenarios work and build, and kind of keep that within that. So, I see Mike is trying to say something. We keep it blocking.
Well, yeah. I mean, as we kind of move around for some thoughts and questions, I actually had a similar, I don't want to say concern, but curiosity to Chris, because reading through this book, it's inundated with the supernatural, the folklore, the mythological, but I didn't get a very good vibe for how much of that is supposed to actually be in the average session. If I'm playing something like World of Darkness, I know that 99.9% of the setting is going to be mundane. It's just going to be normal things, and it's that little bit of creepiness here or there that really kind of draws you into the darker elements. On the other hand, I feel like this game could be much more like Silent Hill, where there is just crazy stuff everywhere once you walk into that town. So my question for, I think, Crystal and David is,
Mhm.
where do you think that fine line is? Where do you think the amount of spookiness vaguely should be? Understanding that it could always be adjusted for anyone's personal game.
Crystal?
So what I would say is that you kind of have to read in between the lines for some of these things, because they do put some of the mundane stuff, like the the union workers fighting and stuff like that. That's actually a very mundane not day-to-day thing, but a mundane thing that's happening, and then just things kind of are interwoven into that, if that makes sense. So it's not like the book, I feel, focuses on the supernatural sheerly for the fact that it is them taking day-to-day stuff and then putting old gods of Appalachia into that. So you're supposed to kind of take it as there's day-to-day stuff happening, and then here is the stuff that's going to start interjecting that make it weird. So it's not going to be like a speed run of Silent Hill.
Yeah, I mean,
there's definitely a way to play it like a Silent Hill game. So
yeah,
without too many spoilers, but Barrow could quite easily be Silent Hill.
So here would be my question, Crystal. Would you say it's 50% mundane, 75% mundane, or 95% mundane?
what I would say on how I would run it is that it starts off as 95% mundane. And then as the characters start to discover stuff, you start to realize just how much isn't mundane.
Yeah.
But that you never noticed because you didn't know it existed.
Like a Mortals Chronicles of Darkness.
Yeah,
yes.
I was going to say it feels like it should be run as a God Machine Chronicle, where you replace the God Machine and
architecture.
Architecture, with the old the old gods and the green and
I would very much agree with that.
But then I guess that's the point, is you want to make. I feel the horror, to some extent, should be the horror of, like you say, whether it's fighting for the unions or maybe it is fighting against some sort of
corporate greed
or injustice, or if your players are cool with exploring those themes, like some of the bigotry and how that then behind that or adjacent to it, maybe better as adjacent to it, unless it's like corporate. So bigotry, I would say, is always better to say there's something adjacent to it that is exploiting the mood of the events going on. While if it's something that's more corporate and or industry or to do with money or just development, then definitely have something that's definitely woven within it that you just can't see until it's too late. Which again, I guess, leans it towards the same way that you would take ideas from, say, Cult. Cult, I think, is in that same kind of vein as well, where you can't, you don't see things, you don't, it's not present, or it's an emanation, and so you don't actually realize it's paranormal at all because it's something else influencing it. So I guess, again, some other places to gain inspiration on how to kind of run that balance between the supernatural and the material is also like Werewolf the Forsaken, to do with how animistic entities are influencing the material. So yeah, that's where I would mostly go for inspiration, which then leads us into the thing of, like, I think if you go heavy on the supernatural and go for that heavy, it's, you've gone to the weird town to find someone that's missing, and you go full Silent Hill, or you ramp up into that. That's very kind of fits a one shot. Whereas I guess for campaign, something that's a bit longer, you're going to want to dial that down and get into the personal and family struggles, business struggles, and how that is all tainted by ancient things.
Yep.
Like why, like for example, why do two families hate the hell out of each other? It's because apparently so and so killed so and so, but then you find out that death is orchestrated because of some, sacrifice
you just
to
make
some
you
ancient
completely
entity.
making. There is actually one.
there
one
is
of the
several,
storylines within the podcast is exactly that.
Yeah.
So it does. There are episodes where there are the one shot feel, like you say, the Silent Hill, creepy town, go in there. Oh my god, why do nobody have any eyes? Kind of thing. And then there are the longer stories where you get the family feuds. You get learning about why one of them is a teacher and is no longer living with their family, and all sorts of weird stuff. And then magic shit happens at the end.
I guess the other thing the other route you can go for if you wanted to slowly get that sense of weirdness is, but make it maybe approachable for players, is if you say they are, go the Twin Peaks route, have outsiders be feds going in, and then if you look again at all these ancient entities, it's it's the Red Room.
Yeah.
One of the things I noted about this book, and maybe I missed it, but I felt like there was a distinct lack of like federal government or even really state government. This was kind of like a sort of like a almost like a stateless place in that regard. There was obviously like towns, communities, and clearly there's at least one really, really evil corporation, but it was almost kind of untouched in that regard.
Very much so.
Which means if you were to do the Twin Peaks route, actually we just like Twin Peaks, where there's one or two FBI agents here, and they have basically no backup. They're kind of just on their own, which is pretty cool, pretty powerful story.
I think like they are very clearly trying to not include law enforcement. Law enforcement does appear sometimes within the podcast, but they're not prominent. They're a bit useless. They're a bit slack. There are parts of ACAB within it, which is good, but there's very much no overarching power structure, governmental or statewide, within it. It's very much more focused on the local, on the family, on the small towns, and how the communities interact, rather than how they are being controlled by a government. They're being controlled by the corporations. So it's corporate horror over state horror in that respect.
Nice, interesting.
Which I've not even thought about until you mentioned that. But you can also probably maybe see why it's such a thing in such an area, because it's difficult to get to. So it's difficult for those greater things to leach into it.
I would also say that in those areas specifically, there is probably we ain't calling the cops no matter what, because one, they aren't going to help us. They're just going to cause more problems. And two, it's going to take them forever to get here. Yeah. So why bother? So I think there's that there's a cultural thing of not calling the cops.
It's a family problem. We'll deal with it.
Yeah, it's a family problem. We'll deal with it this way.
Yeah, I'd not even thought about that. So it's a really good.
I was just checking because I think there could actually be a really interesting thing where you look at like the fact that I was just checking the wiki on this, because like what was it? FBI technically formed in 1933, so before that's the Bureau of Investigation, and that was a relatively tiny department. So I know it could be really. It could be an interesting thing where because again, like such, their you could look at it where they're looking at like corporate fraud and things like that.
That would be an amazing thing. Corporate fraud, and kind of they start delving into Barrow and Locke, and then
Yeah,
they
exactly.
discover
Like,
exactly what that is.
Treasury agents. Treasury agents. Someone's not been paying their taxes in this fucking town. And
that's a really good story idea.
I just think that angle may offer a way of people to kind of play characters which are diverse and outsiders, and therefore not have to feel like they have to kind of like how they have to play at the natives as in that respect.
Yeah, we'll come to obviously character creation next episode, but as we've discussed, it's a very close knit game. You are going to be playing characters from these small communities, so there isn't much at the moment to kind of go beyond the small communities, the small towns and boroughs within character creation. So it would be really interesting to see concepts like that, like you're an outside agent who has been sent into this strange world, this close-knit world, and you've got to try and break in and work out what's going on. That would be a complete...
The other agents you could easily play in this time period. Bureau of Prohibition.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Classic.
Yep. That's why they don't want to call the cops in any of these places.
We've got a chess club. It's just a chess club. Don't worry about it. They're just playing chess down there. Ignore the rowdy nature. It's a big competition, honest. Prohibition. It's not leaned into much in the book, but it's definitely a thing you can play with.
Yeah.
But yeah, Twin Peaks kind of proto X-Files. That's kind of it's definitely an angle you could do.
Yeah. I would love to kind of delve into that. So you can probably just quite easily take this setting and throw it onto a system which would allow that. It's like me and Crystal have said many times that we're probably going to use this book as a source book for other systems, and as a setting book. I very much see this as a setting book for me personally. We'll come to rules and things next time, rather than delve into that. But yeah, you could quite easily hack this and throw it into something like Hunter.
Yeah, obviously,
if you want to do stuff like that. Mike, you look like you're... No?
Nope. Not unless you want me to talk about a couple stories.
Yes, please. I was going to say,
Go on.
We'll round up with some nice, wonderful stories of the Blue Ridge Mountains.
Yeah. So I've been through different parts of this region many times. So I'll just share a couple of things. One, of course, is that I visited Centralia, which I think is technically at the north end of Appalachia. Not sure exactly where the dividing line is, but that is, of course, the place that inspired the Silent Hill film, the first one, where it's just got a coal mine just burning underground, and everyone's had to evacuate. It doesn't have ash flying everywhere, but we did walk along this graffiti-filled highway, which I got photos of I can share. And
yes,
we found some of the vents and pipes out in the woods. It was pretty weird to stumble across. And there are actually,
cool.
As of I was there 5 years ago, there were still like 2 or 3 people living there. Their houses were not yet demolished, so they just refused to leave. And then they're like, "Well, it's your health." Another thing which always stood out to me was driving around with my coworker in Western Virginia. We had to drive on Route 666, which was only about 400 or 500 feet long, and it doesn't make any sense to me why it was there. Now there was basically a crossroads up ahead, and 666 was the diagonal, so you could avoid the crossroads, which was really strange to me. I don't know.
That seems like that's been done very specifically. Like 666 at a crossroads. We're not going to do that. Nope.
There was no house on Route 666, and not really much in the area as well. So there was no reason to have it. So it was just bonkers to me. But me and my coworker, we made it through. Did not get possessed or anything,
So
and we're not.
the states have not yet done what Poland did, where they have a Route 666, but had to rename it because people were too suspicious to drive on it.
Well, you could avoid this by going through the crossroads, but we didn't. Yeah, it was pretty strange. One thing we talked a lot about mining during this episode, but there's also in the region, especially the eastern part, some really crazy limestone caverns. So I was in Luray Caverns, which is a pretty cool tourist attraction with a giant musical instrument inside, which just taps on stalagmites or stalactites that are at certain frequencies, basically, to make music,
Oh,
which
that's
is pretty
cool.
neat. But
That sounds
I
amazing.
just want to highlight this, that there's not just mines, there's not just train tunnels, there's also these limestone caverns, which are incredibly extensive. You could slip and fall into one of these, and who knows what you'll find, or if you can even get out. And then finally, hiking along the Appalachian Trail in Shenandoah, we stayed at a lot of different cabins along the way. And one thing that you could not get used to was all the noises at night. I've slept out in cabins, just in the woods, in tents many times, but it was, when the sun set, it was incredibly loud. There were coyotes, maybe fisher cats, tons of crickets and other things, insects. It was louder perhaps than living in the city sometimes. So that really stood out to me quite a bit, and could be definitely something to mine for your game.
Noises in mountains. We've talked about this, I think, before, Chris and Crystal, where the sounds in England, because we don't have any real natural wildlife, camping out is very, very quiet.
Yeah.
And people are quite quiet. There's a creepiness to that, but in America, you get mountain lions and shit that scream at you and whatnot. So,
Yep.
I think that's definitely something you can lean into. But right, I think we're done for this. Unless anybody has any final thoughts, Crystal, Chris, Mike.
I'm looking forward to digging into the like how the mechanics work with the setting, especially playing through it. Because I've always enjoyed Monty Cook's development process and like how he does things. I may not always like the system that he's working in, or this like the cipher system or anything like that, but it is always interesting to see how he takes it and like adapts it for different settings. That's always something that as a developer I personally appreciate from him.
Well, if you are desperate to see the game being played before we get there, next Friday, which is, what is the date next Friday? The 19th. I'm starring playing in an Old Gods live stream over at Stolen Fires. It's a short run campaign. I think maybe 8. We're aiming for 8 sessions. So we'll be looking at how you can kind of go from that family interactions maybe into, I don't know, spooky stuff. I'm playing in it. I'm not actually running a game for once. This is going to be a real novelty for me. Actually playing a character. So if you're interested in that, go check out Stolen Fires on Twitch. It's owned by Rachel Judd, who's done some work for Chronicles of Darkness and Vampire.
Yeah.
Did the Black Hand book, the community content one.
Awesome.
So she's brilliant. So you can go check that out. But yeah, we will be back in 2 weeks to look at the rules and the character creation, which is going to be fun. Hopefully Chig will join us for that one. But yeah, I think that's it for our lore dive into Old Gods. Any sign-offs from anybody and things that we need to say?
I think just
I never get this bit.
The usual stuff, yeah. If you want to contact us or find out any of our social media, best place to go is Linktree /Darker Days Radio. And of course, if you want to email us, that's darkdaysradio@gmail.com. And we've got tons of different social media, Facebook, Discord, X, and Blue Sky, Tumblr. And we have a blog, which a lot of people have been checking out recently. So we'll have to put up a couple more articles or maybe some character creation show notes for next episode right up on there.
Yeah. We could put our characters up from there so people can see what they look like and stuff as well. So,
yep, absolutely. And thanks everyone for coming on this episode. And really great stuff. Really exciting to do another 2 parts of this deep dive. And to all the listeners out there, take it easy, have a good night, and stay safe out there in the woods.